2003, when President Kibaki took over, the debt in Kenya was 600 billion Kenya shillings. 600 billion Kenya shillings when President Kibaki took over. By the time he left, it was around 1.8 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore, President Kibaki borrowed roughly, because there are some decimal points, around 1.2 trillion Kenya shillings for the entire 10 years he was president. And therefore he was borrowing around 120 billion it's actually 100 billion every year. When President Uhuru Kenyatta took over, the debt was 1.8 trillion. In 2022, the public debt in Kenya was 8.7 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore he borrowed around, we can say 7 trillion. So in every year, he was borrowing roughly 700 billion shillings. There is a reason I'm giving these figures. The current administration, when it took over, the debt was 8.7 trillion Kenya shillings. Now, as we talk with you today, the legal debts, because there are others which I'll talk about, the legal debt is 12.5 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore, in that span of less than 3 years, Kenya has borrowed 3.8 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore, Kenya is borrowing 1.25 trillion Kenya shillings every year. And therefore, the money Kibaki borrowed in 10 years, we are borrowing every year. And therefore, every day, we are borrowing 3.5 billion shillings every day. So this conference will be here for a week. So by the time you go back to Nairobi, you can do the calculations. That is the legal debt. Those who follow politics of Africa, you must have followed the politics of Senegal last year, where two gentlemen, that is Diomaye Faye and Osman Sonko, they are currently the president and the prime minister respectively, were actually had been locked in by government then. They campaigned for only 10 days and won, only 10 days, because people were fed up that time. Upon assuming office in Senegal last year, they realized that the government of President Macky Sall in Senegal had borrowed between 7 to 13 billion US dollars of the book. What is of the book? There is a register the DG in the National Treasury is referring to. That is the one when you go to the Central Bank of Kenya and all the government data, you'll get to see how much is the debt in Kenya. That was the same book they thought was legitimate in Senegal then. Upon assuming office, they realized there were some debts baptized in other names. You can call it securitization, you can call it revenue-backed board, you can call it asset-backed board. In Kenya, they have names. One is called securitization of road maintenance levy fund. The other one is called Talanta board. The other one is many others. So they realized there was 13 billion US dollars borrowed of the book. As we talk today, the duo that was very popular in Senegal last year, just wait in the next few months. Actually, issues have already started. Why? Because it is important for a country to maintain one book of debt. And I've been talking about this issue because of the enormity of its importance. Kenya must stop borrowing of the book. Beyond the reported debt of 12.5 trillion, Kenya has already borrowed an illegal debt of 175 billion shillings, where they have gone to the banks, taken a loan of 175 billion, and then they are telling the banks they'll be collecting the fuel levy for the next 7 years. And I'm here wondering, the people in the National Treasury and in government, if you came in to lead and you realize that all the revenue had been securitized, then you'd be elected to do what? So that's one. Second is called Talanta board. The Talanta Stadium you see, the cost is 45 billion in present value. But it is important for Kenyans to know that Kenya actually took a loan of the book of 45 billion shillings. And do you know what? Now, we'll be servicing that debt using sports fund. Every month, 500 million shillings. In 15 years, a debt of 45 billion shillings, Kenya will pay an interest rate of 100 billion Kenya shillings. And therefore, the cost of the Talanta Stadium in Nairobi, the one you see on Gong Road, is not 45 billion. It is the most expensive stadium in the world. It will be 145 billion in the next 15 years. So I've been requesting the people who are dealing with our debt, no one anakuzuia kukopa, but please let us maintain, as we have done in the past, only one book of debt. And this issue, again, was just discovered in Kenya last year. Actually this year, 2025, since independence, we have never done securitization. We have never done those kind of boards. It is important that when we get a squeeze on the normal borrowing, let us not expose Kenya by opening other secret, illegal books of loans. Policy, the issue of policy. I'm just going top line. As you realize nowadays, the fiscal policy in Kenya has now been hijacked by debt. And this is how. The reasoning of the National Treasury, they are my friends, some are doing their best. The fiscal policy in Kenya currently is only addressing one issue to the detriment of the others. Why? If you look at both fiscal actually and monetary policy, if you look at the issue of interest rate, we keep seeing the CPR is coming down. But if you look at the rating to the private sector, is decimated. It is either stagnant or going down. So to whose interest is the interest rate in Kenya going down? It is basically because of domestic debt service. And that is why you see now the composition of debt in Kenya, and everything has ramifications. Previously we are 50-50, that is domestic and foreign. But over time, we are now past 60 domestic. Why? Because Kenya does not want to be accountable to the external lenders. And you can see the trend. If IMF asks questions, what is our response as Kenya? We come to crowd out businesses in terms of credit in our banks. So we borrow internally. So in Kenya, the banking sector is making every year a return in terms of growth in profit, but it's not in tandem with the productive sectors of the economy. Because the government is dominant in lending, in borrowing. In the economic classes, we used to be told the work of government is to release money to the economy, either through banks, through fiscal policy. Now we have inverted. Now the work of the government currently is to mop up money from the pockets of the people and from the pockets of the banks to do the public projects. But you're only transferring farm and consumer, farm and individual consumption to public consumption. Sorry, I just said I'll be doing the highlights. If you look at the exchange rate in Kenya, the exchange rate in Kenya is currently misaligned by around 12 to 18%. Misaligned in the favor of the Kenya shillings. Why? Because of the service of external debt. But what is the ramification of that? What is the ramification of having a misaligned currency, a stronger one? If you look at the graph of the Kenya currency, when Kenya was having its best years during President Kibaki's time, the Kenya shillings was actually misaligned to weaken, not to strengthen. Because when you strengthen the local currency, what are you basically doing? You make payment of interest rate cheaper, but you make all our exports less competitive, and number two, you make all the imports very attractive. That is why you see when the Kenya shillings is misaligned just because of debt, then we take a toll on the other sides of the economy, and especially the balance of payment and in regards to the production side, not just the capital inflow and outflow. Let me, as I come to the conclusion, just say that what I have realized is that whatever PR you play around numbers will always betray you. If I say 4 plus 4 is 8, and somebody else is saying, no, it can be 9. Whether you paint it in black, in yellow, in red, 4 plus 4 will always be 8. And this is the reason I'm saying that. Beyond the paintings we are doing around how we are managing debt, how we want to do this, and how we've been doing this, numbers and figures always summarize stories. Numbers and figures always summarize narratives. Now, let me go back to the same regimes I talked about so that you compare by yourself. And you tell whether the policies now, the fiscal policy, because everything is boiling down to debt, is working or not. And I'll use the figure that encompasses everything, which is the GDP growth. GDP growth takes care of exchange rate, balance of payment, everything else. President Mwai Kibaki took over the economy of Kenya when the GDP in Kenya was 19 billion US dollars. By the time he left, I'll actually give 3 years just to accommodate everyone, because currently we are in our 3rd year. 19 billion US dollar was the economy of Kenya when President Kibaki took over in 2002, 2003. In his first 3 years up to 2005, the GDP of Kenya was 26 billion US dollars. And therefore the growth in 3 years was 36%, just taking this and use at the base. It was 36%. When President Uhuru took over in 2013, the GDP of Kenya was 61 billion US dollars. In his first 3 years, the GDP of Kenya was 74 billion US dollars. And therefore the economy of Kenya by then grew by 21% in 3 years. Now, the current administration took over when the GDP of Kenya in almost 2023-2022 was 114 billion US dollars. We are projecting the economy of Kenya to be 131. We are not already there because it's by the end of the year. But the projection by the end of the year, it will be 131 billion US dollars. So if you do the math in dollar terms, that is 14.9%. Now, all of us, most of us here, did NEC exams, which was out of 100. And for you to do CP, I think most of you got A's in many things. So for us to come closer home and NEC, let's multiply by 2 so that we see. Because our mentality is NEC, even me. I mean, everything I mark is about NEC. So if you times by 2, that exists by 2, that comes to around 72%. In NEC, what is grade is that? What is 72% in NEC? Nisaidieni tafadhali nyinyi watu wa CPA. What is 72% in NEC? Anyone who did a NEC exam lately? Especially this is a KCP, KCSE. I think over time it was an A or something. Now, 21 times 2 is 42%. What is 42% in terms of NEC? That is, after Kibaki, that's the one that was following. Currently, after 3 years, it is 14.9%. What is 14.9% times 2? That is, after Kibaki, that's the one that was following. Currently, after 3 years, it is 14.9%. What is 14.9% times 2? It is what? No, first say the number before you say the grade. 14.9% times 2 is what? 29.8, is it? What grade is it in NEC? What grade? Are those my figures? You can go to KNBS, CPK. I have used government data. Let me also come back home as I finish. Regionally, And these things I'm saying them because we need to be frank about our country so that we know where do we get from where we are. In the year 2024, Kenya grew by 4.7%. I've tried to take many sources and average them. World Bank, UNDP, Kenyan figures, and average them. So the Kenyan GDP grew by 4.7% last year. How did our neighbors fare? Uganda grew by 6%. Tanzania, I have actually taken all the sources and averaged. Tanzania grew by around 6.1%. Rwanda grew by over 8%. So I am talking about this so that Ethiopia grew by around 7%. So we need to know, when we reflect about what we are doing in Kenya, beyond the story we are giving, we need to look at the underlying. The other day I heard Kenya was to be closed for celebrations because I heard there was a big announcement that the GDP of Kenya has been projected by IMF to be the number 6 biggest economy in Africa. And I actually thought you are going to have a national holiday to celebrate. But these are the facts. In the year 2021, listen to me carefully. In the year 2021, the GDP of Kenya was 109.88 billion US dollars. I'll give in dollar terms because even that celebration was in dollar terms. Kenya, listen carefully. In 2021, Kenya was the number 6th largest economy in Africa. In 2022, the GDP of Kenya was 114 billion US dollars. In 2022, during election year, Kenya was the number 6th largest economy in Africa. In 2023, we already had a new government by then. Out of the mismanagement of the currency, in dollar terms, the economy of Kenya went to 109 billion US dollars in 2023. That is the point where Kenya became number 7 after being overtaken by Ethiopia. In 2024, the economy of Kenya persisted to be number 7 in the world at around 120 billion US dollars. So this year, we are now coming to number 6 again. You know, a guy who can come, demolish your permanent house in a village, demolish deliberately. After demolishing because he has money, then calls a village to join for Harabe, and he volunteers to build your house. But instead of building the Mawe house you had, the permanent one, he builds you a Mabati house, and he wants the whole village to hail them as a very benevolent leader. Because Kenya was number 6 largest economy in 2021, in 2022, so returning it to where it was, is that a cause of celebration?
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I get a minute? Omolo?
Yes, yes. Yes.
And that is the reason why Omolo, most of the projects in Kenya, I mean, just try to have your mind go across the country. Look at any project you can identify. I've talked about debt in Kenya. We are borrowing 3.5 billion every day. I've talked about the illegal debts in securitization, Talanta Board, and the rest. They actually are in the plan of securitizing your housing levy for the next 10 years. So they want to take a loan, and the security will be your housing levy. So the government that will come will realize the housing levy was already collected for the next 10 years. But that's not the point I had. The point is this. Of all the projects you know happening in Kenya now, starting with one that we are celebrating, Rironi Mau Summit. It's not part of the debt. It's also not part of the illegal debt. It is another issue. It is your pension money through NSSF that is building that road. So it is not the borrowed money I talked about. It is also not the illegal boats. It is also not the securitization. It's also not your taxes. Talk about a project like Nyota. You must have heard every government official talked about Nyota. It's also not Kenyan money. It's World Bank money. The expansion of Pangani, Muthaiga, Kiharu, Duberi Road is also not your taxes. That is Chinese money. The smart city project happening in Nairobi is also not part of your taxes. That is South Korean money. Any project you may talk about, even Talanta Stadium, is also not part of the debt I talked about, is also not part of your taxes. That is an illegal debt. So the question I have, and the DG I'm sure is listening, where are you taking the money you are borrowing? And where is then the taxes going? Because you'll tell us about budget support. Which budget support? Lecturers are striking for 42 days because of 7 billion. JSS interns, we are still debating about their confirmation. Capitation, the government now wants to reduce school fees for the scholars, capitation for the scholars, and the parents in Kenya will be paying over 20,000 shillings for day school from January, according to the circular that was sent by government this term. Thank you very much.
Thank you.